For the better part of 2001, I stayed with my great grandmother, which I call Granny. I stayed with her because I broke my leg in the early spring, was out of school in the summer, and broke my leg again that fall, and had no one else to look after me while I was out of school because my parents and grandparents worked. Even though breaking my leg was one of the single most painful things that ever happened in my life, I'm glad it gave me the chance to get close to my granny. Granny was quite the able woman for her age. Even though she was in her mid 80s, she had no problem at all taking care of me. When I would stay with Granny, I would spend the day watching her sew quilts and can tomatoes. Come lunchtime, we would eat homemade biscuits with fried spam while we talked. When we talked, Granny would always tell good stories, either about being the youngest of 12 kids, growing up in the Depression, or even her late husband Frank that only had one leg. After I would listen to her talk, I would tell her about my favorite movies and video games. I knew she didn't understand anything I was talking about, but it was nice of her to act like she did anyway. Come summertime when I stayed with Granny, my leg was better, but my leg being better meant that I had to work at Granny's house. Every year Granny grew a garden, and her garden required high maintenance, and every family member had to do their part to help with it. Luckily, I was still pretty young at the time, so I was never made to do any of the really strenuous jobs like drive stabs. All I was made to do was pull the strings off corn and cut the end off green beans. After work was over, I would ride my bicycle around the nearby streets. I always kept my bicycle at Granny's house because she lived closer to the city than I did, and it was easier to ride your bicycle on street rather than dirt. During the fall, my leg was broken again, due to it not being completely healed, and me thinking it would be a good idea to play on the trampoline. After that, it was back to Granny's house again. This time around, Granny decided to show me how to do a few things. She taught me how to sew and how to bake a blackberry pie. I guess sewing was just not right for me, because every time I tried, my stitches came out. But when it came to the pie, it turned out amazing. I guess I had a small knack for cooking. Looking back on those days, I really miss the time I used to spend with my great grandmother. I was a lot closer to her than any of the other great grandkids because I was around her a lot more. My great grandmother actually passed away during the creating of this narration. She was 94 when she passed and lived a long, happy life. Her memory was slipping before she went, but whenever I visited her, she would always recognize me and her face would light up because she'd be so happy to see me.